This cheerful Christmas radio show from 1943 seemed normal until researchers noticed the announcer's voice breaking in a pattern no one understood for 80 years. What they found hidden in that jolly broadcast? A scream for help that went silent for 8 decades. December 2023, Cambridge, England. Professor Margaret Whitmore, 71 years old, sat alone in her study at 2 a.m., headphones clamped tight, eyes closed, listening to the same crackling recording for the 9th time that week. Something was wrong with this broadcast. Deeply, horrifyingly wrong, and she couldn't let it go. The recording was old, ancient really. BBC Home Service, Christmas Eve, 1943. The announcer's name? Thomas Hartley. A voice every Briton knew. A voice that brought news, hope, and comfort during the darkest days of World War II. On this particular night, Hartley sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. Good evening, listeners, and a very happy Christmas Eve to you all. Carols played. Greetings were read from soldiers fighting overseas. Families sent messages to boys in uniform. Standard wartime Christmas fare. Exactly what you'd expect. Except, Margaret heard something nobody else had heard in 80 years. Stress markers, vocal irregularities, strange emphasis on specific words. At first, she thought it was emotion. Fatigue, maybe. But Margaret had spent 40 years studying human speech patterns, analyzing trauma in voices, teaching students to detect lies, fear, distress in recorded testimony. And Thomas Hartley? He was terrified. She transcribed every word, 40 minutes of broadcast. Then she highlighted every moment his voice betrayed stress. Elevated pitch, irregular breathing, odd emphasis. 47 words total. They seemed random at first, meaningless. But then, Margaret remembered her doctoral research from decades ago. During the war, resistance members sometimes used emphasis codes, hidden messages spelled out by the first letter of stressed words. She isolated those letters. They are executing. Her hands started shaking. Prisoners in the basement, help us. They are executing. Prisoners in the basement, help us. Margaret stared at her computer screen. The room suddenly felt ice cold. For 80 years, Thomas Hartley had been screaming into the void, broadcasting his desperate cry for help into millions of British homes. And nobody noticed. Nobody heard. Nobody came. She picked up her phone with trembling fingers. This couldn't wait until morning. This was proof. Proof that something horrific happened at the BBC on Christmas Eve 1943. Proof that had been hiding in plain sight for 8 decades. She dialed Dr. Simon Bradford at the Imperial War Museum. He answered on the 5th ring, voice thick with sleep. Margaret, it's 3 in the morning. I found something. A code. A hidden message. Thomas Hartley was trying to tell us something. Simon, I think people were being murdered while he was broadcasting. Silence on the line. Then, send me everything. I'm getting dressed now. I'll be there by dawn.
The BBC archives didn't want to let them in, took 3 weeks of pressure, threats to go public, calls to members of parliament. Finally, the doors opened reluctantly because Margaret and Simon knew why. The BBC was hiding something that happened 80 years ago, something they still didn't want exposed. The archives held everything, every broadcast log, every staff roster, every internal memo from the war years. Most were routine, boring bureaucratic paper trails. But then they found it. December 24th, 1943, 7:15 p.m., 45 minutes before Thomas Hartley's broadcast began, the log read, Brief security incident, quickly resolved, no further action required. That was it. No details, no explanation, no follow-up, just nothing. But 3 days later, December 27th, another memo, this one longer, more detailed, and absolutely chilling. RE personnel absences. The following staff members failed to report for assigned shifts beginning December 25th, presumed to have abandoned posts without authorization. Thomas Hartley, senior announcer, Patricia Dennison, program assistant, James Colworth, sound engineer, Robert Mills, security guard, Dorothy Keene, secretary, Michael Brennan, junior engineer, Susan Aldridge, broadcast assistant. 7 people, all working the Christmas Eve shift, all vanished the day after the broadcast, gone without a trace. And the BBC's response was, voluntary abandonment during wartime, case closed, no police investigation, no family notifications, no questions asked. The 7 names simply disappeared from all subsequent records, erased, as if they never existed. Margaret felt sick. They covered it up, she said quietly. The BBC knew something happened and they covered it up. Simon was staring at another document. His face had gone pale. Margaret, look at this. A sealed envelope found in Thomas Hartley's personnel file, marked to be opened only by direct family or legal authority after 75 years. It had never been opened. Nobody had claimed it. Nobody knew it existed. Inside was a letter, handwritten, dated December 23rd, 1943. The day before the broadcast, and Margaret read it aloud, her voice breaking. If anyone is reading this, I did not survive. On December 23rd, 7 men entered Broadcasting House. They claimed to be Special Branch. They were not. They were Nazi operatives. I recognized one from intelligence briefings. They have taken control of the lower studio. They are holding resistance members prisoner in the basement. People who were being questioned by British intelligence. The Nazis intercepted them. They planned to extract information, then execute them. They are forcing us to continue broadcasts. If we refuse, they will kill everyone and detonate explosives. I am scheduled to broadcast tomorrow evening, Christmas Eve. I will try to embed a message. I don't know if anyone will hear it. I don't know if we will survive. Tell my wife Eleanor I love her. Tell my children I tried. Thomas Hartley. The room fell silent. Outside, London traffic hummed. Life continued, but in this archive room holding this letter, Margaret and Simon had just uncovered one of World War II's most brutal secrets. Thomas Hartley had tried to save them. He'd tried to call for help, and the British government had let him die, then buried the truth for 80 years.
March 17, 2024. Construction site, central London near the old BBC Broadcasting House. Workers were digging for the new Elizabeth Line extension, standard excavation work, nothing unusual, until the drill broke through into something that shouldn't exist. A sealed basement, hidden, forgotten, not on any modern architectural plans. The foreman climbed down first, flashlight cutting through decades of darkness, and what he saw made him vomit immediately, then scramble back up, screaming for someone to call the police. Within 2 hours, the site was swarming with Metropolitan Police, MI5 agents, military historians, forensic teams, crime scene tape everywhere, news helicopters circling overhead. Something massive had just been unearthed. 7 bodies, all showing execution-style gunshot wounds, shots to the back of the head, hands bound, kneeling when they died. Dental records and personal effects confirmed their identities. Thomas Hartley, Patricia Dennison, James Colworth, Robert Mills, Dorothy Keene, Michael Brennan, Susan Aldridge, the 7 missing BBC employees, found 81 years after they vanished. But there was more. 4 additional bodies, later identified as French resistance members operating in London, coordinating Allied intelligence. They'd been tortured extensively before being executed. The basement walls told the story. Bloodstains, bullet holes, scratch marks where people had clawed desperately at concrete trying to escape, and equipment. German military gear, documents dated December 1943, torture implements, and pinned to the wall with a knife a handwritten note in German. Fröhliche Weihnachten, Churchill. Merry Christmas, Churchill. A taunt. A message, a middle finger to British intelligence from Nazi operatives who'd successfully infiltrated one of Britain's most important institutions and then slaughtered everyone inside. Margaret received the call while teaching a seminar. She dropped her papers, ran out of the building, drove straight to the site. When she arrived, Simon was already there, standing outside the crime scene tape, tears streaming down his face. "They were down there the whole time," he said quietly, "right beneath the building, for 81 years, and nobody looked." MI5 released the classified files within a week. Public pressure was too intense, the cover-up too obvious, the truth too damning. Here's what happened. December 23, 1943, a 7-man Nazi sleeper cell activated with a mission to infiltrate BBC Broadcasting House, capture resistance operatives, extract intelligence about Allied invasion plans, execute everyone, and send a message of Christmas terror. They succeeded. British intelligence detected the breach within hours and surrounded the building, but the decision came from the top. Do not storm the building, risk of explosives too high, hostages too valuable. Instead, wait them out, strike when they try to escape. But the Nazis never tried to escape. Christmas morning, when SOE forces finally breached the basement, everyone was already dead. Prisoners executed. Hostages executed. Nazi operatives dead by suicide pills. All 11 bodies found exactly where they'd fallen. And then the British government made a choice. A calculated, cold-blooded choice. Seal the basement. Classify everything. Tell no one. Why? Because admitting Nazis had successfully held the BBC hostage would destroy public morale in the middle of the war when hope was all Britain had left. So they buried it. The bodies, the truth, the 7 families who deserved answers, all of it, gone 48 years.
June 2024, Westminster Abbey, memorial service for the murdered BBC staff. The British government didn't want this service to happen. Too embarrassing, too public, too many questions they couldn't answer. But the families, they demanded it. Threatened lawsuits, media exposure, parliamentary inquiries. Finally, the government caved, agreed to a small private ceremony. 2,000 people showed up. Eleanor Hartley had died in 1989, never knowing what happened to her husband. But her son, Richard Hartley, 84 years old, sharp as ever. He attended, front row, holding his father's letter, the one written 81 years ago, the one begging someone to tell his family he tried. Descendants of Patricia Dennison came, James Colworth's granddaughter, Dorothy Keane's great-nephew, all of them, carrying photographs, holding hands, finally getting answers after decades of lies. Richard Hartley approached the podium. His hands shook, but his voice, steel, pure steel. "My father spent his career bringing truth to the British people," he began, through his voice, through his broadcasts. In his final moments, he tried one last time. He embedded a message in that Christmas broadcast, a cry for help. And you know what happened? He stared directly at the government officials in attendance. Nothing happened. Because the people who heard it, the intelligence agencies, the military, the BBC executives, they knew what was happening. They knew my father and 6 others were being held hostage, being tortured, being executed. And they did nothing. Silence in the Abbey. Heavy. Crushing. My mother spent 46 years thinking my father abandoned us, that he'd run away, deserted during wartime. She died believing her husband was a coward. And you know what? That was the story the British government wanted her to believe, because the truth was too inconvenient. Richard's voice cracked, but he didn't stop.
The BBC issued an apology last week. Very official, very polite. They said it was a regrettable incident and they're deeply sorry for the lack of communication with families. You want to know what I told them? He leaned closer to the microphone. I told them to shove their apology because sorry doesn't bring back 81 years. Sorry doesn't erase the shame my mother carried. Sorry doesn't explain why they sealed that basement and pretended 7 people just disappeared. Sorry is what you say when you accidentally bump into someone, not when you bury murder victims and lie about it for 8 decades. The Abbey erupted in applause, standing ovation. The government officials looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Richard held up his father's letter. This is evidence. Evidence of a cover-up. Evidence of institutional cowardice. And evidence that when it mattered most, when 7 people were screaming for help, the British government chose silence. He folded the letter carefully. We heard it, Dad. We finally heard it. And we're not letting them bury you again. More applause. Louder this time. Margaret Whittemore was sobbing in the 3rd row. This was why she'd spent 9 nights listening to that broadcast. This moment, this justice, delayed by 80 years, but finally delivered. The families had their revenge, not through violence, through truth, the most powerful weapon of all. The BBC tried to move on quickly, quietly, issue the apology, hold the memorial, close the chapter. But the families weren't done, not even close. Richard Hartley filed a lawsuit. Wrongful death, negligence, cover-up, demanded full declassification of all related documents, demanded financial compensation, not for himself, for a foundation, the Thomas Hartley Memorial Fund, supporting families of victims of government cover-ups, giving them resources to fight back. The lawsuit dragged on for months. The government fought every step, claimed national security, claimed documents were too sensitive, claimed opening this door would compromise ongoing intelligence operations. Richard's response? My father's been dead for 81 years. Your secrets died with him. Release the files. October 2024. The court ruled in Richard's favor. Full declassification ordered. Every document, every memo, every photograph, everything. And when those files were released, the revelations got worse. Much worse. Turns out, the Christmas Eve incident wasn't isolated. Between 1942 and 1945, there were 6 other Nazi infiltration attempts on British institutions. The BBC, Parliament buildings, military intelligence offices, all kept secret, all covered up. And in 2 of those incidents, people died, just like Thomas Hartley and his colleagues. Executed, buried, erased from history. The families of those victims started coming forward. More lawsuits, more demands for truth. The floodgates had opened, and the British government, drowning in its own lies. Margaret Whittemore became a hero. At 72 years old, the professor who refused to let a strange recording stay a mystery. She gave interviews, wrote a book, The Voices We Didn't Hear, Hidden Messages in World War II Broadcasts. It became a bestseller. Her message was simple. Listen closely, because sometimes the dead are still speaking, and they're begging us to hear them. The original broadcast, Thomas Hartley's final Christmas Eve message, it's now in the Imperial War Museum. Visitors can listen with special headphones. The emphasized words are highlighted in the transcript, so you can hear exactly what Margaret heard, the fear, the desperation, the hope. But here's the final twist. November 2024, a package arrived at Richard Hartley's home. No return address. Inside was a journal, leather-bound, falling apart, and a note. I served in SOE during the war. I was there that Christmas morning when we breached the basement. We were ordered to seal it and never speak of it. I have carried this guilt for 80 years. This journal belonged to your father. He was writing in it when we found him. I kept it. I shouldn't have, but I couldn't let it be destroyed. Now, before I die, I'm returning it to you. I'm sorry we didn't save him. I'm sorry we stayed silent. Some orders should never be followed. A coward who lived too long. Richard opened the journal. The last entry was dated Christmas Eve, 1943, 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before midnight, 13 minutes before Christmas. Thomas had written, I tried. God forgive me, I tried. If anyone ever reads this, don't let them bury the truth. Make them remember. Make them pay. 81 years later, they finally did. The British government buried 7 people for 81 years, and they would have kept them buried if one woman hadn't refused to stop digging. If that pisses you off, subscribe, because I'm not stopping either. There are hundreds of stories like this. Governments hiding murders, institutions erasing victims, families still searching for answers. And I have a question that'll haunt you. If you were in that basement with Thomas Hartley, hands tied, gun to your head, what would your last words be? Would you beg, fight, pray? Or would you do what Thomas did? Try to leave a message for the world. Comment your answer. Be honest, because one day, your courage might be tested too, and you'll wish you thought about it sooner. Don't just watch, subscribe. This fight isn't over.